Between 1959 and 1968, more than 300 decommissioned steam locomotives arrived at Dye Woodham scrapyard in Barry, South Wales. However, only 84 of these engines were scrapped. In a selfless act of devotion to steam, Dye chose to store the other locos intact, at his own cost, for more than 20 years, while preservation groups around Britain scraped together the cash to buy their chosen engine. The first such engine to enter preservation after being rescued from Barry was number 43924, which left the yard in 1968. The last left the site 21 years later, in 1989. During this period, Barry became a virtual mecca for steam enthusiasts, with more than 2 million of them making a pilgrimage to the site. Of the 31 Bulleid Pacifics in preservation today, an amazing 28 were rescued from Barry. One of these was Battle of Britain class number 34067, Tangmere. Tangmere is about to depart from the yard for better times, after languishing there for 16 years. Coincidentally, Tangmere had worked on British Railways for 16 years, prior to withdrawal in 1963. The locomotive was about to return to its roots in Hampshire, not far from Eastleigh. Destination was the formative preserved line between Alresford and Ropley, the Midhants Railway. This scene is along the old notorious Winchester bypass, where the laden low loader would turn off towards the Alton direction. Scenes such as this were commonplace in the late 1970s and early 1980s, as many locomotives were retrieved from Barry and taken to Alresford for restoration. The difficult entrance into Station Road caused quite a stir, and quite a headache for the police and the haulage contractors. Tangmere was essentially a chassis with boiler and wheels, as many of the important parts, including the motion, were lost over the years at the scrapyard. This would present the owners with considerable costs in the following years, as we shall find out later in this programme. Our story of Tangmere now really begins, as we follow its restoration to full mainline working order. With the involvement of sponsors Laminated Profiles and major shareholder Brian Pickett, the main overhaul of Tangmere actually began in the mid-1990s. This is the scene inside the main A shop at Swindon's old Great Western Railway locomotive works. A private company had taken over this section of the works to carry out engineering work on steam locomotives. It was decided to take Tangmere here to advance the overhaul and to be on site for major work in relation to its wheels and frames. By now the frames had been derusted and primed, and the horn guides carrying the axle boxes prepared. The three-cylinder locomotive was erected at Brighton Works in the summer of 1947, Oddly enough, Brian Pickett visited the works at around this time, and quite likely saw his locomotive under construction all those years ago. Little did he know he would be reunited with it some 34 years later. The wheels had their journals and crank pins turned at Swindon, and although they had to be redone, the tyres would also be turned here. Clearly the project was forging ahead. A new tender tank was ordered, along with a new drag box. This one was clearly on its last legs. Also by now, new connecting rod forgings had been made in China to replace those missing when Tangmere was bought. It soon became clear that the whole project was turning into one of the biggest, if not the biggest, overhauls in preservation history, and that meant another move, this time to the workshops of Riley Engineering at Barry in Lancashire. The works at Barry was used to major overhauls of large Pacific locomotives, but this would be their first Bulleid Pacific. As we shall see later, the engine proved to be very popular, and they didn't want to let it go down south again. Tangmere was starting to look more like its final guise, even though this casing and the boiler would be lifted off again to prepare for hydraulic and steam testing. Nevertheless, an enormous amount of work took place at Barry. Yards and yards of pipework associated with a Bulleid had to be made and fitted. Most of it was hidden, of course, beneath the casing of this unrebuilt version of Bulleid's masterpiece. Added this time was the pipework necessary to cater for the air braking of Tangmere, a factor that would cause nightmares for the operators and owners of it during her first mainline runs in 2003. The new train protection warning system was also fitted to Tangmere to make it one of the most advanced preserved steam locomotives in the country. In 2001, the 6'2" driving wheels are seen following ultrasonic testing. This was as a result of cracking found in West Country Bulleid Pacific Bodmin that summer, and all Bulleids had to be checked in line with safety regulations. Here is the crank axle ready for fitment of the unique chain-driven valve gear, which will be encased in the Bulleid-designed oil bath. The 3 cylinders travel 2 feet and are a little over 16 inches in diameter. They would produce the power to move this 128-ton locomotive and its train. OVS Bulleid was employed by the Southern Railway after leaving his post of deputy to Sir Nigel Gresley on the London North Eastern. He brought with him many new ideas, and one of his best was the boiler fitted to his Pacifics. Tangmere had 3 boilers during its life. This one was fitted in May 1958. Following a complete retube, it stands ready for its first test to judge its integrity. The hydraulic test was successfully completed, which meant that the steam test could now follow. This was crucial to the whole project, to get Tangmere operational again, and that eagerly looked forward to first mainline run. The precision job of aligning the axle boxes in the frames took place at Barry. This was a crucial part in the process of getting the rolling chassis. Oil channels have been carved into the metal to allow lubrication. One of Bulleid's main innovations was the welding of platework on the boiler rather than the traditional riveted process used since steam began. The 32 large flue tubes and the 112 smaller smoke tubes are just visible beneath the superheater header mounted on the front tube plate. As the various boiler tests came and went, the final assembly could take place. The chassis was turned out of the works with a huge crane to lower the boiler into its final position. The facilities at Barry were paramount in an attempt to get Tangmere operational again in a comparatively short time. Riley Engineering had outshopped LMS Princess Elizabeth in 2002, a project which in itself ended up a far larger task than that envisaged. Before the manoeuvre to lower the boiler onto the frames, the new ashpan had to be joined up to the foundation ring of the firebox, a tense moment for all concerned.
I'd get that front touch in and get a cotter in it.
Hoist down slowly.
The locomotive would now disappear into the works for the final stages of this major rebuild. one that would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. The job of lagging the outer firebox and boiler barrel could now take place. This method entailed the use of special material which would help contain the heat produced in the 242 cubic foot firebox. Fitters were everywhere, putting on the final pieces of this massive jigsaw. The new tender was now complete and ready for the painters to apply the first coats of primer. Within a year this locomotive would be resplendent in Brunswick green. Tangmere had a brand new cab fitted, which was the 9-foot wide variety, fitted to some of the Pacifics at Brighton. We see the many cab fittings now in place, including the clinger valves and injector water and steam controls. The Ajax firehole door is also in situ. Before the final fitting of the smoke box, a key figure in the completion of the project, Jock Adams, applies his skills to the steam pipes, which twist and turn their way from the superheater header to the cylinders. Jock is very experienced in these machines as he was heavily involved in the overhaul of City of Wells, an unrebuilt West Country class, at the Worth Valley Railway in the late 1970s. After various hold-ups due to other major projects at Bury, Tangmere finally came into being during January 2003. From that point onwards, observers started to see what this Bulleid masterpiece was all about. Around the corner was a gala weekend on the East Lancs Railway, and Tangmere was headed up as the star of the event. We see the first video pictures of Tangmere, alive again and ready for action. It was almost 40 years since it had last steamed, and exactly 22 years since it left the lonely scrapyard at Barry in South Wales. Fitters were kept busy adjusting and testing many of the items on the locomotive as it warmed up during that first eventful day. What had immediately become apparent was that the sole determination of owner Brian Pickett to see the project through almost at any cost. His dream of reuniting himself with Tangmere again after watching it being built way back in 1947 had become a reality. It was about to give pleasure to countless other people in the weeks and months ahead. The Bulleid Pacific family of locomotives has ended up the most preserved of all locomotive classes in Britain, with 11 Merchant Navy class Pacifics and 20 West Country and Battle of Britain class light Pacifics. The superb Brunswick green livery with cabside numbers await the fitting of the new nameplates and crests. The RAF Tangmere badge will be fitted below the cabside numerals. The tender has one of the longer wheel-based Merchant Navy frames and has been adapted to carry 5,500 gallons of water. Tangmere first had nameplates and this impressive RAF crest fitted at Brighton Station in September 1947, along with 2 other members of its class, Sir Keith Park and Fighter Pilot. The former also survives at the Bluebell Railway. The nameplate was unveiled by Commanding Officer of the RAF station at Tangmere in West Sussex, Wing Commander W.G. Clouston. He was of course commander of one of the most important airfields during the Battle of Britain, and had the chance of driving Tangmere, the locomotive that is, out of Brighton Station a few yards on the naming day. Tangmere was about to enter trials on the East Lancs Railway and put in some important mileage before her ambitious mainline schedule, due to begin in the March. Its very first turn hauling a train is seen progressing out of Bury towards Ramsbottom. Just for security, number 76079 banks the train at the rear.